Hey, good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning.
It's been a month or so. It's the spring of 2024, and we're 6 months and 2 days away from the November election. And so, you're still in class or no?
Yep, still got a few more weeks left.
Okay, so, man, I'm surprised you're willing to take time out of critiquing your student essays, but that's nice of you to do so.
Well, it feels great to be back. I miss you guys.
Yeah, back at you, back at you. So, Professor, I have one overall comment, and then we're going to go to Bart for your first question, and he's going to surprise both of us a little bit. But the overall comment is, I think most of us, and that probably includes me, are kind of doing it wrong. It seems like we're arguing about all the normal issues, student protests on universities and abortion and guns and gosh, all the stuff. It seems like we're arguing about all the stuff, but I'm not sure we're doing it right. I mean, I guess we're in a meme competition or a jab and a poke or a gotcha and a ha ha society now. And we have such a short attention span that maybe that's all we can expect of each other is that we share a cartoon on the internet and think we are good citizens or something. And then I have this second approach that I'm thinking that most people don't do anything at that at all. Actually, they're just mowing the lawn and they're going to work and they're trying to raise their family. And so I have some concerns about our society, and then I don't have any concerns about our society. I think, but if no one has any concerns about our society because they're just trying to raise their family and go to work, then I have a lot of concerns about our society because it's a small, really angry group on both sides that just hate the other side, and they kind of spills over where they seem to hate a lot more than just the other side. They hate a lot of people. And so, anyway, that's my overall context of why I value your speeches so much. But it's been 2017 and 2019, and to now it's 2024. I'm not sure you're giving enough speeches. So that's my overall context. Before Bart asks the first question, and then I'll follow up with some other questions, and then Jay can jump in. Bart, what is your question of Professor Tootle?
Okay, my question is very broad, Stephen. What I'm curious about, I read the two speeches and they're fantastic. And I hope maybe in the fall you will give another one to those ladies, just because it seems like it's just something that that you do. But what I was curious about is why do you think you have developed the political views and the approach you have to government and politics and so forth? Is it all from learning and reading and studying, or is it just something that you think was innately in you?
Well, that's a good question. Because my brain was spinning as you were asking. I think um, my approach to both religion, politics, history, a lot of it came from a sort of a general view of World War II, which is that growing up, I loved my grandpa, and I loved his brothers, and I knew that the Nazis were the bad guys. And so pretty early on, I had this view that no matter what kind of person I was as a grown up, I just didn't want to be like the Nazis, And this led me to a sort of general study of the past, but and it gets maybe a little more specific and weird, and that is I didn't want to join something out of emotion or out of reaction. What I sort of learned and what I saw even when I was a kid about that I was turned off when it looked like people were following a crowd out of reaction or emotion. I mean, I don't think I could have put it in any sort of articulate way when I was a teenager, but it also gave me like I was extremely cautious when it came to religion. I didn't want to join a church because I didn't want to join a church because I was being swept away by the emotion of the moment. So I decided, well, what I want to do is I want to study religion, and I was lucky in that I went to, I went to a very good community college, and I went to, well, first, I mean, I just say, like, praise to my teachers who would always encourage this streak in me, whatever it was. I had extremely good English and history teachers for most of my education, through the community college where I now teach, and then when I got to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, I just got lucky. I happened to be there when George Kotkin was there, and Craig Harlan. His writing name is David Harlan, if you ever look up his book. Tim Barnes, and in every one of these cases, these were people who really encouraged what you might call ground up thinking. Go do the work first, then explain that explain in a way that demonstrate what you're talking about first, and then you can have a more thoughtful. Then where the actual areas of disagreement are. Because if you build from the ground up and you're talking to someone else who builds from the ground up, then you know that the areas of disagreement are usually pretty narrow and based on a guess. So in one way, I would say it looks like humility in one sense, because I know that even the smart people are just guessing about what the right thing to do is. But on the other hand, I guess it could also look like arrogance in that I really only want to engage with people who have done the work, so that there's a sort of common sense of, and I'm getting to the answer to your question, I promise. But when I went away to Ohio, again, I encountered these incredible instructors, and I was given a lot of time alone, which I don't think a lot of people have. And I got to think
Along
about,
with the professors, you mean?
yeah, well, time alone by myself, but also time alone with these incredible brains. And I heard Marilyn Robinson say in an interview, like, that one of the things you want to try to cultivate is you want to try and cultivate a beautiful mind for yourself, because that's where you live, this space between your ears, and what kind of a brain do you want to put in your own head? And I got to think about how I viewed God, religion, truth, beauty, love, ideas, but in every case, I was told, go read some more books, go read some more sources, then write about it, and then we'll talk about it. Do the work first, and give yourself time. Time to let yourself breathe and stare off into space and go for long walks. And then state your. I always like something that Jeffrey Herf, I think, told me. I'm going to mess this up, but the general sentiment that he said is you want to, have kind of two brains, where your historian brain, where you're just trying to tell the story, with the facts at hand. And then then I have my sort of public intellectual side, where I'm still trying to tell the truth, but I'm willing to explore ideas that might be wrong, and I'm willing to state them boldly and plainly. You want to be understood. But he said, in neither case are you trying to tell a lie, but you should be able to express yourself bold, in a bold, clear way, but hold those ideas more lightly. Like if and the other kind of superpower, this wasn't from Herf, but just something I've discovered over the years, is what a superpower it is to say, oh, you're right, I'm wrong, I'll never say that again, and thank you. Instead of digging in my heels when I'm wrong, I just say, oh, hey, how about that? And then now I get to be right. You know, like I don't have to don't let being wrong be, you know, part of your ego or something where you're like, no, I just and so when somebody, I mean, and I'd like to think that my general approach to history is that I'm wrong about everything ish. Uh, but I'm getting better, and every year, every month, every day, every time I turn the page on a good book, I'm learning how I was wrong and how to be better in the future. So, you know, learning should make you both humble, but also, you know, give you a sense of direction. And I mean, that I think is the where my outlook came from. It was shaped by, generally speaking, wanting to be one of the good guys, not one of the bad guys, and then trying to surround myself with the best possible. I mean, and I think that's really the other thing. Is like at every stage, I just said, whoever is the best, that's who I want to listen to. And that's what I want to put in my head. You tell me what the best version of this is, and that's what I want, and that's who I want to be around. Those are the conversations I want to have, and uh, it, it it means that you can have a general direction in life, and also you kind of, I think, know when to put your foot down, because you're I tell my first year students here that, you know, studying history should give you a spidey sense. I'm sure I've said that before. You know, you don't really know enough to, um, you know, go charging off and proclaim yourself a genius. But when somebody says something that's wrong, it should raise the hair on the back of your head and say, I don't think that's right, you know. But over the course of a lifetime, what it should do is it should tell you all the times when you really should take a stand and say, okay, we've gone beyond what is reasonable. And I don't need to ask anybody else what's reasonable. I think that's also another thing that sometimes happens, is people sort of lose their sense of like, is this reasonable? Is this unreasonable? You know, like, um, and so studying history gives you constant reminders of context, you know, and those questions of Thomas Sowell that he said, that I always try to ask myself, you know, at what cost compared to what, and where's your evidence? before I before before I ever make an assertion, I want to make sure that I've answered at least those three basic questions. Because what you really come to realize is that a lot of people you're talking to, even if they're very passionate about something, they don't really know what they're talking about. You know, you don't have to engage with their ideas because they don't know what they're, you know, so they've never asked themselves at, at what cost compared to what, where's your evidence, you know? And so, you know, sometimes you can just let people say crazy things, and other times you have to stop and say, you know, I know you're saying this crazy thing, but I don't agree with you. And other times you have to say, you know, get off my lawn. uh, so long answer, Bart. I thought, but that was a good question. I really had never thought about it before, so I'm glad you asked.
It is nice. Do you have a follow-up, Bart? Or is it back to me?
Back to you, John.
Okay, Jake, do you want to interrupt, or are you good listening for now? If so, just jump in. Okay, cool. So, Professor, I appreciate that answer, and it was really neat to have Bart take a big picture. You saw the title that I put on this. What are conservatives and Republicans to do in 2024? Well, we haven't gotten to that, and we're not going to get to that yet. Um, and I have, you want me to tell you the reason we're not going to get to it yet, or
Sure.
from my first intro, do you have enough guess on why we're not going to get to it yet?
Well, I think it's probably a path you want to lead me down here, so I'm willing to
Okay, let me not answer it then yet. So in your first speech, did you read either speech that I posted on my page, or are you going to do this from memory? How's your memory of your own darn speeches?
Well, I went back and reread the one to the Exeter women from like 2017. But what
Okay.
was the other one that you posted?
Then the other one was kind of an in-depth speech on the same topic in 2019 to another Republican group,
Huh.
and I put that in the first comment. So you didn't
Oh,
read that
okay.
one. It was
Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah, it was a long, we may get to it. I might pull it up. Where there was a long description of all the Republican presidents since Lincoln, talking about what it means to be a Republican and why that's important. That's a gross summary of it.
Mhm.
But let me not even get to that yet. If you would have said, "Hey, John, you've done a lot of work in this issue over the last few years, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 longer, but in our relationship, you've done a lot of work on race and race relations." And I hate putting it in quotes, but that's because of all of our conversations. We probably shouldn't even talk about race and race relations in the way that we all are talking about it. That's a side issue. But if you said, John, I really want you to read the report on abolition put forth by the National Convention of Colored People in 1847 as the basis for the Republican Party, I'd kind of go, what? Or I'm not interested. Or how's that affect abortion or Ukraine or Israel and Gaza? I'm not interested, Professor. I'm not even positive I'd listen to a dear friend, you, saying, read that. So I
Mhm.
was really kind of shocked that that was the first thrust of your speech is the looks like 8 or 9 principles of the abolition put forth by the National Convention of Colored People in 1847. And it still seems pretty extraordinary and kind of meaningful today. So,
Mhm.
can you, instead of me just assuming why you put that in there, can you kind of flush that out a little bit on why you gave that part of the
Well,
context, the
it's
bedrock?
actually something influenced by Eisenhower. I mean, I first got into serious, I'd say, study of history, um, being interested in the Eisenhower administration and the early Cold War generally. And Eisenhower, in the middle of his presidency, pulled out this book, and it was by a guy named Arthur Larson, and it was called "What We Are For." And one of the things that Eisenhower always emphasized, and I didn't realize at the time that it was part of such a long tradition within the Republican Party, but Eisenhower was trying to make the case that you have to know what you are for first. And Lincoln said the same thing in the famous Apple of Gold fragment on Constitution and Union, written in 1861, which is, we must think about these things so that we'll know the points of danger. You have to know what you're for first, because when you're going to be facing a series of decisions or crises, you don't want to be making that decision as a reactionary. And the way I explain it to I don't know if I've ever told you this story about my dad. Um, but I always use this story about my dad teaching me how to drive. Have I told you this story before?
Not
This
yet.
is
It
this is
doesn't ring
one
a
that I
bell.
tell my classes, and I always start it with the shocking first line, which is, my dad sat me down to tell me why you have to hit the dog. And everybody's like, "What? Your dad's a sadist, right?" I'm being provocative, but
Especially in current context with Governor Noam. I'm not sure that's a great story, but keep
yeah,
going.
well, that's why you got to hear the whole story, right? Which is that when I was learning how to drive, um, there's a sort of mechanical part to it, and I was grateful for my mom, just throwing me behind the wheel and saying, you just got to get, used to the controls and all that. But my dad, before, he was like, before you ever actually get behind the wheel of a car, he said, what's more important, human life or animal life? And it's like, well, obviously human life. I think at the time we were even making hamburgers or something. So it was like, we've obviously decided that we value human life more than we value animal life. And he said, so when you're driving, um, always be aware of your surroundings, but know that every now and then a dog or an animal is just going to run out in front of your car. And if you can, slowly, deliberately, safely stop the car without swerving, without slamming on your brakes and causing an accident, by all means, miss the animal. But however, like before you actually get into the car and start driving, decide that if you can't do that, that you're not going to put human life at risk for the sake of an animal, and go ahead and hit the animal. But decide right now, when we're sitting here in the living room and it's, we're comfortable and it's not a crisis or something. But when I'm teaching that Lincoln document fragment on Constitution and Union, I always tell that story about my dad, because that's what Lincoln was saying. I need to get my head straight, because once I'm become president of a country at war, I need to know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to have time to think about constitutional theory once I'm actually in office and reacting to things in real time. But that's, I was trying to get at what my answer to Bart, but like in every one of these cases, the reason why you want to sit down first and really put some time into thinking about big picture, what you value, why, what your priorities are, and not just your values, but how you order your values, because you have more than one, understanding that you value more than one thing in life, and what you need to do is balance these many interests. And then when a crisis comes, you'll know what to do. And just to tell another story about my dad that I just thought of, but when my grandpa died, one of the things that my dad said was, whatever you decide to do is the right thing. And I always thought that was, and I think that's the advice I gave you actually when your mom passed away, or what I told you, like, you loved your mom. That's a relationship between you and her. And you know what that relationship was. So whatever you do right now, that is the right decision. And you don't need to doubt it. You don't need to wring your hands and think, oh, I'm doing the right thing. Like the relationships, those love relationships that we have, like if your head and your heart are in the right place, then you're going to do the right thing. And but again, that's if you have already done the work. If you have already spent time thinking about how much you love the people around you and what it is you actually value, then when the time of crisis comes, you'll know what to do. You'll hopefully know what to be humble about, but you will also not be, find yourself overwhelmed by guilt about what you did or didn't do at the time. And, hopefully you can be at peace with even these big moments in life.
So this is delightful. Thank you. Is it relevant? I mean this sarcastically and rhetorically, I guess, but is it relevant in the 2024 election and how conservatives and Republicans should engage in this election? This deep, you're saying do the work, so write down your thoughts, get organized, because it's too late when we're during the crisis. Well, we've got 6 months before we actually pull the lever. And if any of us wish to have some impact, hopefully positive, on our friends to vote this way or that, is this
Well,
still
I'll give
time to?
the Speaker of the House seems to have had a change of heart, and it was prompted by him getting an intelligence review, where he got to sit down with all of the experts and ask all of his questions, where they told him, this is what's happening, this is what will happen, this is what will happen if we don't do this, this is what will happen. And he got to have the people who actually know give him good answers to hard questions. And after he got that intelligence review, he just said, yeah, we're doing this aid for Ukraine, and I don't care if it costs me the speakership. That's how important it is. I wish he had done it earlier. He probably, tens of thousands of people died because of a couple of truly, I don't know, what is the right word? It's not necessarily evil and it's not stupid, maybe feckless, like people who are a combination of unserious, amoral, um, unserious or amoral actors. And really, just we're talking about a handful of people. There's probably 6 people in Washington, D.C. And the fact that they're stupid or immoral or amoral or they're whatever, I don't know what happened to them. Maybe their fathers couldn't show them affection or something. But
But they're also, you're being a little too unkind. They're probably responsive to the needs of their constituency, are they not? They'll probably get reelected.
sure, yeah, but I'm also not talking about everyone who voted against the aid package. I'm talking
Right.
about the 6 to 10 like true morons.
And they'll probably get reelected. I'm talking about the
Yeah,
same six.
but here's this is also a real point of, I think, leadership, and this is something that Eisenhower modeled himself on Lincoln, and so did Theodore Roosevelt, and Coolidge modeled themselves on Lincoln in this regard, is that statesmanship is about getting people to be the best versions of themselves, not the worst. So when I say these sort of evil, dumb, feckless, and people, it's because what they do and how they get reelected is by bringing out the bad. They encourage and bring out all of the worst elements of their constituents. You don't have to do that. Because even, when we say, oh, you're representing your constituents, like part of the job is educating your constituents. Because it's one of the reasons why I admire Congressman Valadeo so much is that he keeps winning by just working really hard on educating his own constituents so that when they have a question, he answers it and they know and they heard from him. So when they get, my kids always joke about it because we get the ads against him all the time on YouTube, and we always joke about the voice. We do it like David Valadeo claims that women should be whatever. Call Congressman David Valadeo and tell him he doesn't represent, and we imitate the voice of the negative ads.
It's the same voice we have in Colorado. Interesting.
Right. It's amazing. It's probably AI generated by YouTube or something. When you have to work a lot harder, but if you do that, then all the people who actually know you say, oh, I'm not falling for that. I know that this ad is a lie. But you have to know what you're for first in order to do that. It's a lot harder to do that in a modern media age. It's much easier to spread, hateful lies. I think the algorithm experiences that we've seen since 2014 are evidence of that. But the other thing that I think is strange is we don't really have a good way of measuring normal because none of our institutions are normal anymore. And so we have all these normal people trying to live normal lives who have simply tuned out of these abnormal institutions, and nothing is capturing them. Like you go to like some youth sports event or an academic event going on at your kid's school or something, and you're like, oh, hey, these are the normal people who actually live and exist in society, and they're all normal and they're all nice and they have decent instincts and all that. But our abnormal institutions are making it seem like they're all a bunch of lunatics. But I'm wondering if it isn't like a looking glass type problem. Have you ever seen the movie Being John Malkovich?
No, I think
I don't
you've
know if
talked
Bart
about
or
it
Jake, if
before,
you've
though.
ever
I'm
seen
pretty
this
sure I haven't
movie.
seen it.
But there's this just little tiny moment from that movie, Being John Malkovich, where it's a strange thing to even set the scene. But there's the protagonist walks into an office building, and meets the sort of boss of the company, and then his, I don't know if it was his secretary or his wife or something, comes in, and she doesn't understand anything that anyone is saying. And he apologizes to the guests and says something along the lines of like, let me apologize for my speech impediment. But he actually doesn't have a speech impediment. Like
Right.
she is the one who can't process language properly, but he believes that he isn't speaking correctly and that he has a horrible speech impediment that makes him impossible for people to understand. I think that what we have right now is uh, I don't know. I don't know if I should keep using the term elite, but a national elite institutional problem of all of our national elite institutions being so completely out of whack that they're not able to capture what is normal anymore. They can't process it, they can't understand it, and they can't project it back. And so we might have this view of the United States and the American people as bitterly divided, and maybe none of that's true. Like, because one of the strange things is, like, I would say my anecdotal evidence is, and we talk about this all the time, my anecdotal evidence is that almost everybody in America is nice. Almost everybody in America is good. Almost everybody in America wants normal, kind, thoughtful, balancing of values in every aspect of government. That doesn't mean we don't have, self-serving interests in life, and, we all want whatever it is, 10% more income than we have or something. And but like, I just wonder if we just don't have the elite national institutions capable of capturing that anymore. But it's not, I mean, I wonder if it's like similar to a sort of the message of Reagan in the early 80s. This might not be an American people problem. We might not have a social and cultural problem in the United States. We might just have rotten institutions that are distorting our view of ourselves, our views of ourselves. And I can tell you a couple of other anecdotes off the air, but they involve, well, I'm trying to think of how can I put this. I have a lot of interactions with history teachers at the high school level in a lot of various ways. And I can tell you that they don't know anything and they've never been taught anything, and they're expected to teach students. And then we go around and say, oh, the students don't know anything. Well, it's not their fault. Like, it's the teachers, but it's not even the teachers' fault. It's actually the teachers' teachers. The problem is with the teachers' teachers. It's not with the teachers and it's not with the students. But we register it because the students come to us and they don't know anything. And then we say, oh, it must have been their bad high school teacher. But it really, the bad high school teacher, they're doing their best. They were never taught American history. And it's not so, and this stuff has been going on since the 80s and 90s, and it's not a lot of social sciences like this, we have some sort of social science metric that measures a thing, but we confuse the metric with the problem. We think that somehow we can fix this problem by doing something to students, and you're like, no. And you think, well, we need better teacher training for teachers. Well, in a way, yes, but it's actually the structure of the educational institution that they came from that has produced this. It's, a sort of, and I guess we could go down that road and talk about, how it got that way. But I just wonder if we're confusing the metric with the problem in many of these elite institutions. Does that
These
make
are,
sense?
oh yeah, sure does. I'm not sure how I have gonna get through 15 or 20 questions when I
Yeah,
still haven't got
sorry.
through my first one.
I'll try and
Uh,
make it shorter.
no, it's delightful because it does. You are getting to the answer. Or even
okay.
I'm not leading you well. You're leading us. Um, but let me. I want to go back. Well, you mentioned Reagan, which is great, loved and hated simultaneously since the 80s. But I want to go back to this report on abolition
Hmm.
by the National Convention of Colored People in 1847, because there's 8 different principles, and I want to see. And I'm sure you don't remember them off the top of your head unless you've like memorized them for some reason. But do you want me to just read them for you real quick?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then I pressed the wrong button. Where are we? Yeah, then I pressed the wrong button and lost it. Okay, here we go.
I mean, while you're looking it up, I
Proclaim the
remember.
truth. I got it. Proclaim the truth and do not lie about it.
Yeah,
1847 to 2024. Is that what Republicans and conservatives should be doing today?
it's what everybody should be doing.
Everybody should be doing it. Proclaim the truth and do not lie about it. Okay, cool. I like that. 2, see your problem clearly and act accordingly. You've been talking about that
Yeah.
while we've been going along. Agree?
Yes.
Okay. Rec- recognize that you are in the minority. What do you mean? What did they mean by that? I know what they meant, I think. How does that applicable to us today?
Well, how it's applicable is I think about this sometimes when I think about like, the big question of who do you vote for or who do you agree with? And, the answer is nobody, right? There is no other human being on earth who I agree with 100% of the time, including myself yesterday and an hour ago. So this idea that somehow somebody is going to be a perfect manifestation of like my ideal of a statesman, that's off the table, right? So we're already talking about, your kind of what are your no-go issues? Where will you say no? But if I, I should just let you keep reading the list, but if you should just know that you are always in the minority. You're always in the business of trying to get other people to take the next step, whatever the next step is. So, I mean, again, the example I use, with Eisenhower and his civil rights, record. Read that David Nichols book, A Matter of Justice, and how Eisenhower modeled himself on Lincoln in these regards. But the example I use when I'm talking about Eisenhower and civil rights is Eisenhower always made the smallest possible argument, not the biggest one. He would make the tiniest argument that every reasonable person would agree with, so that he was only excluding the unreasonable people. And in other words, everybody, if you're talking to a group of people in any age, but in 1953, everyone's a racist in some, so he would make the argument that, this is never going to be put on the side of a building, but he would say, listen, when we collect tax money, from everybody, and we don't discriminate on the basis of race when we're collecting tax money. So he says, I don't see how we could logically, legally, or morally discriminate when we are spending the tax money. And, that's not going to go up on the side of a building. It's not going to be a civil right, but that's how you get every single person. You say, I'm not insisting that you insist on the most extreme version of civil rights. I'm just trying to get you to take the next step and remember remember the better version of yourself, the version of yourself that is reasonable, that is logical, that is moral, and is capable of. And then he would always do this other interesting thing where he would say, And how can we discriminate against things like that are matters of discrimination and things as inconsequential as race and religion? So he wouldn't be asked about religion, but he would always say race and religion because Americans already understood we don't discriminate on the basis of religion. So he would say, well, you already are who you are as a person. You are already someone who agrees that you shouldn't engage in discrimination on religion. So all I'm trying to do is say, just be like that on race. And I'm going to also explain how if you are at all a reasonable person, you'll go along with this. And that's how you get the broadest number of people to take the next step. Realize that you are in the minority, and it becomes a way of um, um, kind of reminding yourself that what I need to do is I need to um, I need to get this person who thinks they disagree with me to be reminded that they don't. And you can do, but an important step in that is remembering that you're in the minority.
So, give an example on the next one. That was number 3. Give an example. Translate this on renouncing violence. Number 4. Can you give an example on how Eisenhower would have gotten us all to agree that we should renounce violence, at least against our fellow citizens?
Yeah, don't join the book burners. Or, and a very famous speech he gave on intellectual freedom. And then I would also say, in domestic policy, when he sent in the airborne in 1957, he was saying there will be no violence in the integration of the Arkansas schools. He was like, I'm going to go in with such an overwhelming show of force that we're going to establish the principle that whatever happens here is going to happen peacefully. Um, and that's, I know it seems strange to say that the deployment of a massive number of soldiers was a renunciation of violence, but it was the thing that made it possible for peace to seem normal. That you have to have peace first. You've got to because politics can't take place as long as violence or the threat of violence is the normal state. It's anarchy. Anarchy is the rule of the violent and the strong, and you have to first get to the understanding that that won't fly.
I assume you would translate that into the macro of Ukraine and the Israeli-Gaza war as well. I
Yeah,
assume that's the same principle.
right. And the same principle goes for us fighting the Japanese or the Germans in World War II, right? In other words, the war has to end before you can have peace. But we'd have to first establish that you don't get to act like this. That is not the world we live in. You don't get to attack deliberately attack the innocent. That is a principle that must always be checked.
Cool. That's a whole topic unto itself, and we probably will talk about that in the future again. Number 5, decide on an individual basis who must be rejected and who must be convinced.
Yep.
To me, it seems like we've all lost it on that. I don't know why we don't think that there are some people that can be persuaded, and let's figure out what they're looking for and how to persuade them. I don't understand why we're in an insane, non-convincing cycle right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been just like incredibly blessed to have changed my mind on a few people. I mean, it doesn't happen very often, but like over the course of my life, I've actually been wrong about people. And after you've done it a few times, you start thinking, oh, maybe, I should, again, hold some of this a little loosely. And, you know, you sometimes hear something about someone, and then after you get to know them, you realize like, oh, that other person was the bad one. This person's just fine, or um, I, yeah, so it's something that I think comes with a little gray hair if 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 wisdom's what you're actually after.
Number 6, do not alienate people of goodwill.
Yep.
Create goodwill and always encourage the best parts of our common humanity.
Yeah. Yep. Again, that's very standard. And the reason why I found that document
You
interesting,
just love it.
yeah, I love it because it was in some ways what what I've been trying to learn about is all these gaps in my knowledge of America, which was a never ending struggle. But we sometimes act like Abraham Lincoln just fell out of the sky somewhere and that he invented all these things, but that's not true. The social movement that produced this was much deeper and richer. And so I started going back in time to the formation of the Republican Party, and then I started going back in time to the movements that led to and the kind of social movements in the United States, in particular in the northern states. And what you find is that even that document that came out in 1847 was the result of 60 years of thinking and refining positions on these issues, and and 100 years before that, and probably 1,000 years before that. But I mean, that's the glory of history, is that you come to find out everything came from somewhere.
It's yeah, I just think it's striking though to have it so eloquently put in 8 principles. And the 8th principle is reject well, number 7 was believe in truth. And number 8 is reject evil. I just think it's really if John, please read that. And I'd go, okay, I read it, but I don't know if it would mean as much in context about what we should really be doing today.
Well, I was also doing my best to kind of summarize the document. It's written in the language of 1847. But I hope my job as a teacher is to make things easier to understand. So,
Yeah, you did.
putting it into
You did.
bullet points.
You did it well, but then let me go to your and let me just read this if my computers will allow me. This is your speech now. These are your words. Ready?
Mhm.
This is the proper course after those 8 principles. This is the proper course to take with those people who call themselves Republicans but reject our principles. I'm happy to explain to any reasonable person how the Declaration and the Constitution protect individual liberty in our pluralistic system. But if after hearing all Americans are entitled to their freedoms as individual, a politician does not protect the individual liberty of the Muslim, the immigrant, the homosexual, or the black man accused of a crime, then we must conclude that we are dealing with somebody who is stupid, evil, or a liar and unfit to govern. Wow, that's a pretty interesting transition from that to that. Does that sound like a modern conservative or Republican in today's 2024 issues? What you then led to?
I mean, it should. Yes, I think that a lot of people who call themselves conservatives and Republicans have no idea what they're talking about. Uh, they probably haven't. I don't know. People give themselves labels. It doesn't mean that it's right. I could. I think about this. Getting back to I used to use this as, again, another example in class where I'd say, you know, we could all go out into the quad and proclaim a new country. That doesn't mean that we're a country. Just running out and applying a label to ourselves doesn't make us and of course I'm talking about like the pretended Confederacy that proclaimed itself to be a government, but that doesn't make it so, um, any more than somebody taking over a part of a college campus in the year 2024. They can proclaim all they want and say, "Oh,
Here
we're
are our
this," but
demands.
yeah, forget it. Like, you're not. Like, you can't get me to
Go
get sucked
ahead and
into
jump in, Bart.
abnormality. Yeah, Bart.
Um, Stephen, I have a question that kind of relates to this period of time we're in
Mhm.
specifically. How do you talk to people who are very, I would say not just very, extremely uber impatient about the change they want to see in the world? You know, like a lot of the protesters that are going on about Gaza, you know, and I don't want to talk about Gaza specifically, but, you know, they want total social justice for the Middle East right now. And they're not going to take anything less than that. And, you know, and then you've got people on the right, you know, who think the swamp has to be drained now, you know. How do you, what do you do with these people?
Well, if I'm speaking to them one-on-one, it almost always, the first step is to just get them to calm down and stop shouting. So often it's like, you have to get to, I mean, literally, like, let's get someplace where it's quiet. Let's sit in some chairs. And then every time they start to yell, you say, let's take a deep breath here, reset. And, you know, I sort of just insist that whatever we're going to talk about, we have to do it calmly and quietly. And because and again, this is probably harsh, and this is the meaner, younger version of me saying this, but I used to joke that, like, the minute somebody starts yelling at you, it's no longer about the issue, right? They're just screaming, my father couldn't show me affection. You know, my mom called me fat when I was 12. You know, like, they're not talking about whatever the issue is. It's them, and it's some emotion that has absolutely nothing to do with whatever political issue they are claiming it has to do with. They are people experiencing some sort of psychological trauma. And if you can't, and you know, I'm not a therapist. Like, you know, all I could say is, like, go seek professional help for this thing that makes you think that you need to scream at me. But if you want to talk to me, let's talk. And often people will say, you know, well, you keep saying that now, and I'll remind them this. And I was talking to my best friend about this all the time, which, you know, we come from, it's funny. He's one of those people who you would think that we're on opposite sides on politics, but we're not. You know, it's just the world thinks we are, right? But he often, you know, finds himself in these same positions because people will then say, well, you keep saying this, and we'll have to stop the conversation and say, you know, I've made no assertions. You know, I haven't actually asserted anything about any of these issues. All I've done is ask you about your position and what you want, and you find that hostile. Let's talk about why you think it's an act of hostility for someone to just ask you what you believe in. You know, and you don't actually have to. I remember talking to a Trump supporter at the convention, having one of these good conversations. And it was the one right before Kasich dropped out, but it was pretty clear that, you know, Kasich gave a speech at the convention where he's like, you know, the end of the road's here or something. So I knew it was over. I remember talking to this Trump supporter, just asking her, like, well, how's it going to build the wall? You know, how's this going to happen? How is Mexico going to pay for it? And after talking to her for not long, 10 minutes, she said, I know it must seem like I don't know anything, but I'm really a smart person. And I said, okay, well, you know, that's interesting that you feel like you need to proclaim that to me. But what she, at least, I mean, she probably walked away and, you know, cursed me under her breath as she did it. But at the time, she actually acknowledged that she had no idea what she was talking about. And she had no idea. And that, like, she didn't even know how government worked, you know. And she knew that she didn't know how government worked. And that for her, Trump was like a magic box that she was just putting her own anger in, you know. But if you're talking about how to deal with people one-on-one, I think that's the only way. But you know, sometimes I do run across actual like unreasonable and evil people, and I just say, you are an unreasonable and evil person. Like you, I hope that you aren't for the rest of your life, but I'm dealing with you right now as you are, and I can't deal with you because what you want to do is shout at me and get in my way and yell at me and harass me, like, and like it's not productive, and I won't engage in that, you know. But you realize like you're only alienating, I don't know, a few 100,000 people out of a nation of 360 million people. You know, in absolute terms, those a few 100,000 people get a lot of attention. But just remind yourself that, you know, 36 to 40 million Americans don't think that the moon landing happened. You know, try to put that into perspective. You know, like there are people who you can't convince. People will carry around cell phones that travel to satellites, and they won't think that the moon landing happened. And you know, there's those 36 to 40 million people can make a lot of noise, but you don't have
They
to
can't.
engage with them.
So, Professor, not to stop our conversation for today, but to get close,
Yeah.
I went back to two of your writings, and maybe you've given hundreds of speeches. I don't know. You probably have. I only found two of them, um, with like 5 minutes of research. But they were meaningful to me, and I think they're relevant in 2024. Um, give some now contemporary advice for whether somebody proclaims themselves to be a Republican or a rhino or a former Republican or a conservative or moderate centrist, or I guess I'm not speaking to the liberal because that's not my camp, or the socialist because that's definitely not my camp, or progressives I don't quite get. I mean, I hear them and I have some empathy towards their love of poor people or humanity or the oppressed. I can see some virtue in almost everything besides pure socialists and communists. Well, especially communist socialism, I guess, in theory is nice. But I'm not speaking to those people. I'm speaking to you and me, or former yous and me's, the centrists, the normal, the normies. I hate that word, but you know, just people trying to live their life. What should we all be doing in 2024? In this presidential election cycle, I know we should keep doing everything we are doing, but if we want to be a good citizen, if we want to engage properly in the American debate, how give us some advice. You went back to 1847, I think, if my memory is right, and gave some advice and then some thoughts. But to talk in layman's terms now, what should we be doing?
Well, I mean, I was thinking, the first thing is I would say reject the label, reject the premise of the question, and begin with the mental exercise of rejecting the label or the categorization of another human being. You know,
Love that.
and when we were interviewing, actually, and remember when we interviewed Hiram Lewis, for Left and Right, and his advice was go granular. Well, I hate that kind of buzzwordy type. I'm sorry, Hiram. Hiram came out a couple weeks ago with his daughter and did some motorcycle riding in the foothills here. But I think he's right in what he is saying, which is like, take this conversation to the next level of specificity. You don't just ask, what label do you apply to yourself? What is it that you actually want to have done? You know, and then begin engaging with people. And then I was thinking about something that one of our other guests said, Jeff Bloodworth, when he was on the show. When you asked him, you know, what should we be thinking about? And his big answer was, don't bet against America. You know, like, don't bet against the American people. That's my one point of optimism. Like, that maybe it is the metrics that are just measuring the wrong thing. We're in a feedback loop where we have all the wrong filters. You know, we're the guy in the movie Being John Malkovich, who thinks that he has a speech impediment when really we're the ones who are fine. It's just the things that are trying to measure us are messed up. You know, we've got a broken scale. The lens on our camera is cracked. You know, you can come up with all the metaphors you want. But I think that if you really want to, you know, I think that that advice from 1847 is good. But as far as dealing with people and how to be optimistic, you know, reject the label, reject the premise of the question that's given to you. You know, reject the sort of bubble test, you know, the multiple choice answer, you know, and try. I used to say this actually sometimes when I would have students. I don't do this assignment anymore. But I would give them a list and I would say, tell me what you believe in without applying any labels to yourself. Or I would give them a political issue and say, all right, you have to describe what happened, but don't use the terms right, left, Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal. You know, just tell me what happened without applying those labels.
Okay, so Professor, that's a nice transition to let me ask the main thrust of both your speeches in 2017 and 2019 that we haven't directly talked about today. So that's a nice transition to let me finish with this. The You're bragging about the fellow Republicans you're speaking with, and you say someday you will have great and proud moments of everything you did to protect the three great principles that have defined us since 1856: individual liberty, economic opportunity, and American exceptionalism. So instead of a label, you may want those descriptive principles to be something we talk about, and then how all those fit under one of those three principles. Can you give some reflections on those then?
Yeah, and all those things need to have this sort of parenthetical properly understood, you know, like understanding that what it means is that you have rights and obligations as an individual. That now how do you practice them? How do you protect them? Right? One thing that, you know, when Lincoln was really, there are certain elements of Lincoln I feel like are completely lost, you know, when we talk about him. And one of the things that he was really good at explaining to people that I wish this element was not just gone, but he would explain how liberty to all is good for everybody. Like, stop thinking about it as a favor that you're doing to Black people. This is what's good for you, right? Like, liberty to all is what clears the path for all, right? And when he talked about what the founders did, he said the reason we know that the founders didn't mean equality of condition in saying that all men are created equal is he said that they didn't make all white people equal. Like, so we know that that's not what they were doing. And that is here's a word that I swear Eisenhower must have picked it up from Lincoln, but a shibboleth, like I don't know, look it up. But it's a perfect word. It's like a false, something that looks true but is false. A combination of you know, several. It's like a good word because it combines several fallacies. You know, this is you're gaslighting me. You're proposing a false choice, and or instead of using gaslighting, like you're trying to create a false reality by creating a false choice, you know, and you're misleading me in a way that looks like the truth, but it isn't. And um, and then understanding what it means, economic opportunity, like making sure that we don't tell people what kind of life they're going to live, but we want to create a society where everybody has a chance to live the best version of their best, become the best version of themselves. And you know, the old if a Republican was, you know, if I just, you know, old comparison I used to say is like the Republican says, like, we're going to build a water system here, and we're going to build some troughs, and we can take up a collection to build some fencing here just among ourselves, and we might even be down for some spending money on training some horses, and we can lead those horses to the water, but we can't actually force the horse to drink. And I would joke, the liberal is the one who wants to take that horse's head and shove it underwater and hold it there until the horse is dead, and then say, well, I guess there's something wrong with the trough. Like, no, like at a certain point, what we as Republicans want is we want opportunity, you know, so that if somebody's into watering horses, that there's a lot we can do in that regard, but can't do everything. And recognizing the limits of what other people can do. And you know, that's something Moynihan sort of always said that was the difference between liberals and conservatives. So yeah, individual liberty, economic opportunity, and American exceptionalism. Understanding just how important it is that we continue to demonstrate that human beings can govern themselves, that we don't need an aristocracy. And one of the things that has really emerged in the last couple of years that I never really thought about was the role in anti-aristocracy thing, how important it was that the American Revolution emphasized this lack of an aristocracy, and how anti-slavery people always used this rhetoric to understand that the American Revolution was about eliminating aristocracy, and slavery is the worst form of aristocracy. And when I kept seeing it in the documents, I was like, oh, you know, this is a deeper thread here. Like, no more kings means no more masters, you know? And thus, when we see it keep popping up in these anti-slavery documents, you're reminded again how important it is to have this example that human beings don't need masters. Like,
So briefly, you spoke about it in both speeches. Briefly give a retort or a riposte against the seemingly desire for populism in both parties right now. It seems like a lot of people do want a king.
yeah.
They want, as long as their king's beating up on the other king, or
Mhm.
worse, killing the other king, in America situation. And so it's a pretty forceful speech. Maybe that's the thrust of the major thrust of both speeches, is to be reticent against those who are willing to tell us what they think they want to hear and willing to impose their supposed values by force. And let's fight against that. Is that accurate, or will you want to be more sophisticated?
Well, I would just say the reason it's that way is that their teachers and their teachers no longer taught anybody any of this stuff. So, like, I would just say, like, my kids get zero. And it's not like they're going to sit down and listen to me about history, you know? So I'm actually shocked at how little history my kids know. You know, like, they just don't know anything. And if you don't know anything, then all you're left with is some sort of reactionary appeal to justice, which can be pulled in any direction. And of course, that's what populism is. You know, you're defined by your hatred and say, I've identified this horrible thing and I'm against it. And you apply a label to yourself, like, this is who I am. And then you get a nice dose of confirmation bias and and forthwith declare that you want the national daddy to fix all of your problems, and reward your friends and punish your enemies. Like, because the alternative is it just takes so long to do. I mean, and it's not just history education, by the way. We always talk about it, but it's basic values of civilization is what has been erased from our curriculum. Even the idea of having a common language, it's because you might not understand what it means for history education that we stopped assigning books, but what it means is that there is no more common language. That I mean, have I told you the story about the Star Spangled Banner from recently? I don't know if I went through the I haven't seen you guys in a while, but I was teaching the War of 1812, and I just went and I was talking about the Star Spangled Banner coming from the War of 1812. And I started explaining how now when you look at the lyrics to the national anthem, you can see quite clearly it is about this specific event that was from the War of 1812. But then I was seeing so many confused looks on the faces of my students. And I don't think somebody who's over the age of, say, 50, if you've had no, or maybe mid 40s, if you're in your 40s or 50s or older, how disconnected you are. You get pretty disconnected from basic education. So you might not realize just what it's like or how bad it is. But I said, "Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?" And I said, "What is dawn?" No one knew. "What so proudly we hail?" What does the word hail mean? Nobody knew. At the dawn's early light, nobody knew what twilight was. They didn't know what gallantly meant. They didn't know what the word broad meant in broad stripes. They didn't know what the word perilous meant. Are you getting the picture?
So those are just, you learn all those words from reading novels, and I mean even just kind of junk novels. I mean, not even history treatises. You just, by reading, you learn those
Yes.
words.
So part of the destruction of civic education is just the destruction of the idea of, education, right? That I really run across many people in my life who are truly anti-education activists. They think that nobody needs to know anything anymore. And that is disturbing. So, and you get this if you want to say from, like, in some ways, you'll be at a fundraiser talking to a big time Republican donor, and they say, "Yes, we need to teach basic American history." I'm like, "Right." And I'll say, "And we need to teach classics, and we need to teach literature, and we need to teach poetry." And they're like, "No, that's a waste of time." What we need is pathways. What we need is STEM education. And you're like, no. Like every engineer in America, and you think about what a college education used to mean, is that if you had the prestige of a university education, you would assume that people knew what words mean. But I'm just telling you, most of the teachers I run across, when they don't know that stuff, and you're like, well, of course, because young teachers have now gone through the educational system in the years since things kind of fell apart. It's much, much worse than I think the average person could ever imagine.
Fascinating, and you bring that up regularly. tie it back to what, without labels, I guess, what the common citizen should be doing in 2024. And Bart, you get the last question, but that's an interesting point. But we're not going to solve that. That's a
Yeah, yeah.
generational issue. That's a century long issue probably. How do we engage the next 6 months? Is my last question, and then Bart, you're going to get the final question. What do we do, Professor? You and
I
I,
don't, yeah,
everyone we
I don't have a 6 month answer for you. I mean, my advice is always like to read 3 good history books. You know,
But
you'll
that's how we best influence the election. I read 3 history books, you read 3 history books, and somehow the world's a better place.
yeah, I think so. Because if you read 3 history books and they're good, your entire worldview will change. uh, like you will be a different human being than you were before, and what the version of you that you will be is so much better than any piece of single advice I would give that anyone should. I would say read Freedom from Fear by David Kennedy. Read I don't know, um, What Hath God Wrought, and I don't know, Gordon Wood's, Oxford History of the American Revolution. And you'll be such a different human being after you read those 3 books that it would be a far better experience for the average person than anything I would recommend.
Fascinating. Bart, you get to conclude if you'd like.
Sure. Got to get myself off of mute. Okay, Stephen. So this is kind of this may sound like a totally off the wall question,
I love it.
but and it's really not a yes or a no question. I would assume your motorcycle riding actually is great therapy for this age that we live in.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, that is often what I tell people to do is I'll say, what you need to do is you need to get on a motorcycle and you need to ride until you get it. Like, you need to get away from your phone. You need to get away from these voices. You need to get away from all of this idea that what's coming through your phone is reality. Like, and it's going to happen 3 days into a motorcycle ride. So you need to go on a 7-day ride. And by the time you come back, you'll be better. Your brain will be rewired. And you can take your phone and go, oh, this isn't real, and set it down. You can say, oh, you can take your computer and go, that's not real either, and close it down. But you need to reconnect with reality. And it's not something that happens in a day. Like, I always say that, like, when I go on these longer trips, it's like somewhere on day 2 or 3. And just to, be vulnerable and weird. I remember I was on this one trip and I was like, I think I rolled into Mammoth, which is on the other side of the Sierra. And Mammoth is one of the few places in California that kind of reminds me of Colorado. So if you want to know one of the only places in California that's sort of like Steamboat Springs or something, like, that's Mammoth, right? And I went about my business there. And I got up in the morning, I put on my helmet, I started to roll out, and I smelled the trees and the way that the air felt, and it was cold. And one of my friends who has this band called Little Wings, and he had this, and I put on some music. I started to pull out of the town, and I just started crying. And I still don't know why. But like I said, just something happens when you're about 3 days in where you are mentally healthy. and and yeah, I get it. Not everybody has 7 days of, and for me, it only happens when I'm by myself too, so that's why I go off by myself 7 or 8 days. And all I can tell you is get a Triumph Bonneville. Get a Bonneville and get a Bonneville T100 and start riding across America. And about 3 days in, you'll be better.
So I'm both not surprised at much of your conversation, but I am surprised at the last one on how we can be most effective in the 2024 election.
Yeah.
So I'll ponder that on a long trail run or a hike up a 14er. I will ponder that.
I would say not a trail run. Go off into the wilderness for a week. Go hike for 7 days, and sometime on day 3, because it's not, one day doesn't do it.
Yeah, you have no idea of my capacity to zone out for hours at a time during mundane normal life, Professor. So, but
Yeah.
but your point is well taken. Last call. Do you want to make a last statement that we didn't get to today from your speeches, or is this probably good? What your call?
Well, I guess the sad part is, I haven't given any speeches because nobody's asking anymore. Nobody wants to hear what I have to say. So the reason I haven't given any speeches is that nobody has asked me to give any speeches.
Yeah, and actually that doesn't surprise me, and for a variety of reasons, but mostly good. I do think though that we should give some versions of speeches or letters to the editor or op-ed pieces. And as you may know, I'm working on a couple of those projects for the next 6 months, and I'd ask you to consider dusting those off and combining it into an op-ed, or maybe
Sure.
sometime making that the presentation is given a 2024 version of what you think is important, and then we just record that with no question, or maybe you give the speech and then we open it up to questions. So ponder that, because that's meets some of my need that we all should be doing something regarding the election. And it's not what we're all doing. I think we're all doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Let's
Well, the
just
problem is, remember,
tweet.
my first advice though is that everything that I do requires a lot of work. And then you get to see, I was talking to George Nash about this. He's like, I was asking him about some project he was working on. He was like, remember, you're just seeing the little tip of this iceberg. That if you're doing it right, I can't pump out this stuff, like that's,
Right.
hundreds of hours of research goes into 500 words.
Right. Right. Lovely. I think we've met our mission for today.
Yes, thank you.
Let's ponder. There are one or two people that would like to debate us or you. I'd rather it be you than me. I could facilitate, but ponder that. Not
Take on all comers. I've done it many times.
cool. I'm not sure whether we're going to meet next week or two, but let's plan ahead. And I do ask for anybody that finds us on the internet somehow to engage in meaningful ways. That is my plea and my urging to you. Professor, thank you for your time. Bart, thanks for joining in.
Thanks. See you guys.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Have a good day, y'all.
Great to see you guys.
Yeah.